The Summer Games Minute, brought to you by Mass Mutual. It is one of the most coveted trophies in the world, but are gold medals really gold? Well, mostly, they're not. The gold medals given out these days are nearly entirely silver and are plated with pure gold to give them that iconic sheen. Silver medals are, of course, made with silver, and bronze medals are a combination of copper and other metals like tin or zinc. And while winning an Olympic medal is priceless, the value of the materials in the medal are not. In recent games, some of the materials used to make the medals have come from recycled cell phones. Mass Mutual celebrates women's sports history and understands the nuances in how women want and need to manage their finances. With quality product solutions and guidance, a Mass Mutual financial professional can help you plan for both short-term and long-term money goals. Learn more and get started at massmutual.com.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
The Athletic.
The race is on, and the 2024 F1 launch season is now in full swing, with Haas the first to show us a brand new car. Well, at least a digital version of it that reveals a reasonable amount of detail. Meanwhile, the Hamilton to Ferrari story rolls on, with Toto Wolff having said his piece on the shock move. I'm Edd Straw, and joining me to take a close look at the new Haas and have a quick chat about Toto Wolff are Gary Anderson and Mark Hughes. Well, Gary, welcome to F1 launch season. We'll get into Haas shortly. That'll be the bulk of the podcast. But we are going to do a quick update on Hamilton to Ferrari following our previous podcast. Before we hear about what Toto Wolff's been saying, it's worth getting your opinion on it, as podcast listeners won't have heard about it. So what did you make of the shock news that Hamilton's heading to Ferrari in 25?
Well, I was surprised for sure. You know, it was one of those things where it had a bit of momentum last season, but it seemed to die out with a new contract signed for 2 years at Mercedes, and Lewis seeming to dedicate the rest of his driving career to Mercedes. You know, if it really did happen within the last few days, then it's a fairly major blow for Mercedes, to be honest. It's one of those things where you know, sometimes these things are simmering, but there was no simmering to this one. It just happened. So yeah, a bit of a surprise. Obviously, the deal that Ferrari offered must have been fairly impressive, both from a car point of view, from development and from the direction the company's taken, and obviously financially. But never mind that. You know, any top driver really would love to have a bit of a pedal in a red Ferrari. Because, you know, it is one of those things, and if it's the last run and the end of your career, then it's something to do. You know, it's quite motivating, I suppose. So yeah, I'd love to know more detail on it. It's not there; it's happening, and I'll be quite keen to see how 2025 sort of balances out, really, because Leclerc's no slouch by any means, and he's, you know, he is Ferrari's hero. You know, there's nothing to say that Lewis couldn't go there and beat him, but it won't be that easy. So it's going to be an interesting challenge. But we've got a year to go before then, so let's see how that all unfolds.
There'll certainly be lots of talking in the interim. You always have a good saying you attribute to Harvey Postlethwaite about going to Ferrari. So does that apply to the driver if things aren't as competitive as hoped?
Well, I think it applies to anybody, to be honest. Yeah, put your business card on the top of the desk with your what you're getting paid written on the back of it, and every day it gets too much for you, take it out and have a look, and then just put it away again and smile. Yeah, Harvey was quite funny with that, but I think it probably does. But, you know, again, it's a little bit of prestige for the driver. You know, if you take sort of Eddie Irvine, for example, who was, you know, drove and was a very competent driver, won some races against Michael Schumacher, but really was Michael Schumacher's number two. I mean, you know, Eddie can go to Italy and never buy a plate of pasta in his life. because, the Italians just love Ferrari drivers. Countrywide, they know them, and that's a big thing. The following that Lewis will get from the Ferrari mob will be incredible, really. He's got a lot of followers anyway, but, just to add that Italian branch onto it will be just enormous. So, yes, it's not the wrong thing. And again, after his racing days and maybe some little bit of work for him to do with Ferrari as a bit of an ambassador of some sort. You never know what comes out of all these deals, but I'm sure he hasn't done it for nothing.
And we should be able to fill in a few of those gaps about the timeline that you are expressing interest in, because, Mark, we both heard from Toto Wolff not long ago. So can you tell listeners what we learned from him about the way this all played out, certainly from a Mercedes perspective?
Yeah, so from Toto, we learned that Lewis actually told him on Wednesday, which is just a day before the rest of us found out. So Lewis had obviously pressed the button then, but it had obviously been some time in the planning, getting the contracts and everything ready, but ready for Lewis to press the button if he wanted to or not. And what we also learned from Toto was sort of his thinking as they agreed that what we now find out was a 1 + 1 year deal with Hamilton for Mercedes, and that he said it gave them both options for the future. So, in other words, Mercedes didn't necessarily want to be tied into a long time to a driver, that's going to be in his 40s by the end of the contract. And also, when Toto was talking about possible replacements, he said maybe it gives us a chance to be bold, which immediately made us all think of Kimi Antonelli, just about to start his Formula 2 season. And, maybe in those the negotiations for that 1 + 1 deal, if Toto was levelled with Lewis and said, look, the idea is for Antonelli to do a couple of years at Williams and then we'd like to bring him in, it may be enough of a nudge for Lewis to think, well, maybe I just go after year one and, it's my last chance of the Ferrari gig. And there might be nothing for me here in 26, so why not? But I think that's only just like the foundation. I'm not dismissing how much of an appeal it would have for Lewis to go to Ferrari, to be in the red cars. And as he said, and as we talked about on yesterday's podcast, in his interview at the end of last year, he was talking about the excitement of he's thinking back to the excitement when he first joined Mercedes from McLaren, and how that level of excitement can't be there when you've been at a team for 12 years. So he's clearly yearning to sort of mix it up a little bit. And I think all of those things together, the sort of the environment, the years, and the fact that Ferrari was probably able to offer him a longer term deal at the end of the day. I think all those things came together. It made logical sense and it made emotional sense, and he'll have thought, why not? Let's do it.
Yeah, it's certainly interesting that the longer horizon in terms of the deal played a part in Hamilton's thinking. Obviously, the whole thing about a new challenge, that's a good neutral thing for both sides to say, isn't it? Because it says it's all about what the driver wants to do in terms of challenge. So it's inevitable Toto Wolff would also latch on to that. But it was interesting, the talk about potential replacements, wasn't it, in terms of what they might want to do beyond Hamilton. Obviously, Antonelli was the obvious one, Andrea Kimi Antonelli. I did ask him specifically about that and said, is he a possible choice? Could he become a contender if F2 goes well, or is next year just too early to be in a Mercedes? And he gave a very non-committal answer. I very carefully wanted to make sure that what I asked him gave him the chance to rule him out or in, and he sort of avoided it. But what he said is the important thing is that he concentrates on F2. But I think we can take from that Antonelli is absolutely in the discussion for replacing Hamilton. But yeah, the thing that really struck me was that timeline, because as you've alluded to, although the decision has happened quite late and the whole thing has sort of played out in terms of he is moving, Mercedes has happened quite late, and probably Ferrari didn't know for sure. But yeah, the work has been done for quite a long time, I think, on this. So yeah, interesting. And Toto certainly made sure he said he understood it and didn't take it personally in any way. But you've got to imagine there's some there's some surprise just in the speed with which it all ended and what he had. So yeah, very, very, very interesting. I imagine, Gary, you'd like the idea of an Antonelli in that seat. You always favour a young driver, and we know how good he is.
Yeah, I think it's important. You don't learn about it unless you're doing it, and some of the bigger teams need to take those gambles nowadays. George Russell will be a very experienced professional driver by 2025. He's got a lot of years under his belt, maybe not in the greatest of cars, but we know that George can do the job. So at the end of the day, to bring in a new boy and try and find that next Max Verstappen, if you don't do it, you aren't going to do it. And to be honest, by placing him in Williams for a couple of years, it might just knock the momentum. If he does a good job in F2 this year and he's got the momentum going for him, then if you can keep that momentum going, get him straight into your team and learn about it altogether, because it's that's what it's about, just keeping that momentum going. And you'll make a few mistakes, but so be it. That's life. Even the hardened professionals make those mistakes as well. As long as Mercedes end up with one top-end driver, which obviously in George Russell they have, then bring on somebody else to be the next Max Verstappen. And you won't do it if you don't do it.
One other thing, Mark, that I found interesting, and this does touch on some of the things we talked about yesterday, is Toto said that George Russell has the potential to be the next lead driver in the team. And that kind of confirms they know Russell's very, very good. But it's still that teetering on the kind of edge of, is he going to be an absolute mega, or is he just going to be very, very, very good? So that to me hints that they want to see Russell take this opportunity right now and show that this is going to be a better season from the off, and then that could influence second driver choice too.
Yeah, I think so. I think that you're going to use George as the security to allow them to be bold in the way that McLaren used Fernando Alonso's signing in 2007 to allow them to take on the rookie Hamilton. And I think, George, he's been there on equal terms in terms of status within the team, not in terms of money, but in terms of status. They're an equal number one pairing. And you're not going to establish leadership over Lewis Hamilton. You're doing very well not to get ground down into the number two role like Valtteri Bottas did, just on sheer performance. But he's not established a clear superiority over Hamilton, and that would be too big an ask, I think, of anyone. But he's now, he's now secure in his position. You're our long-term guy, so we're looking to you now, and Lewis can just do what he does, and how he gets on is not really in George's control. So all he can do is just maximise his own performances, and knowing that the team are looking to him for leadership.
Yeah, and that's going to be putting pressure on Russell, but it's what every driver wants. He's got a great opportunity now to really establish himself as the main driver for that team. So there's going to be plenty more talk about Hamilton's move to Ferrari over the next year, but I thought it was well worth us quickly catching up on that before getting into the main business of the day.
We love talking stats here at The Athletic. Here's one that's super simple to remember. Discover automatically doubles the cash back you've earned on your credit card at the end of your first year with Cash Back Match. That means with Discover, you could turn $150 cash back to $300. That's right, you could put it towards some memorabilia you've had your eye on, or treat yourself to a premium sports network. You earn and Discover doubles. See terms at discover.com/creditcard.
We'll get back to the pod in a moment, but first of all, let me tell you about Grammarly. Email, Google Docs, Slack, you write across multiple platforms and places during your workday, so delivering consistent, high-quality communication everywhere is key. Grammarly is an AI writing partner that helps you get work done faster with high-quality writing for better projects, proposals, presentations, and more. Best of all, Grammarly works where you work, so you can get more done no matter what tools you use. As a journalist and podcast host, I'm constantly writing and rewriting copy and drawing up scripts. It's part of the job, and Grammarly helps make it faster. It's got some really cool features like tone suggestions to help you strike the right balance between direct and friendly in work emails. Plus, Grammarly has a ton of other great features like advanced spelling, grammar, punctuation, and conciseness suggestions to ensure your writing is professional, mistake-free, and clear. Get AI writing support that works where you work. Sign up and download for free at grammarly.com/podcast. That's GRAMMARLY.com/podcast. podcast. Easier said, done. Right, Mark, before Gary wows us with detail on the Haas, just looking broadly at the car, Team Principal Io Komatsu characterises it as the full-blown version of the concept they moved towards last year with that Austin update. So is Haas going the right way from what you've seen from we should add 10 renders that we've got of the car so far?
It's moving in the direction that nearly everybody else was moving already last year. It's moving further in the direction that they did with their Austin upgrade, where they sort of move the front of the side pod up, give it a greater undercut, and moving away from that original Ferrari philosophy of the outwash and side pods. There was only so much they could do with that because they were stuck with the radiator layout they had, because it was going to be too expensive to change that. And the side impact bar, the lower side impact bar, was at the maximum height. So they've taken the opportunity with the new chassis to lower that impact bar and move some of the radiator area further up, and that's allowed them to have that shape. Side pod more like Red Bull had to start with the beginning of last year, and what everybody moved towards, like McLaren with its upgrade in Austria, and then we saw 3 teams do a very similar thing in Singapore, as Alfa Romeo, AlphaTauri and Alpine all did a very similar thing. So, Haas now looks like it's, in terms of the philosophy of its car, it looks like it's moving towards, it's converging towards what's becoming the standard template.
We can get into the detail now with you, Gary. Obviously, Mark alluded to the repackaging of the side pods, the inlet, the undercut, all this kind of thing. So that's kind of the key thing to look at with this car, isn't it?
Yeah, it is really. I mean, it's about opening the doors. You know, you don't have to open the door and go through it at the same time. But I think what Haas had last year, they were sort of boxed in a little bit. They didn't get the return from the wind tunnel efforts for whatever reason. I'm not saying it was just the car concept, but sometimes you can get yourself in a situation where no matter what you do around the geometry of the chassis that you have, and as Mark says there about the side impact structures, they are very limiting in what you can do around them if you have them in the wrong place. There is a little window of opportunity to move them around. It's not that big, but if you've gone in a different position with them, you can't just move it, because it's the chassis structurally has to withstand the loads. So what I'd say from the car I've seen so far, they've definitely opened some doors to allow them to be able to influence the airflow in certain areas. Now, they don't show any detail along the edge of the floor, the outer edge of the floor, and that's really a huge performance part of the car. But what they have done is opened up that undercut below the radiator intake and the top of the floor, so they can have more flow through there to do something with. Last year they were a little bit constrained. I'm a big believer in the letterbox style radiator inlet, as such, as Red Bull have got, in the fact that the airflow going through the radiator isn't consistent. If you've got cooling, you have to have reasonable cooling for the average speed of each track. So the average speed of each track is, let's say, if you took the whole season, it's probably 210, 220 kilometres an hour. So you look at trying to get your cooling efficient at that level of car speed. So below that, basically, the radiator will have lots of flow going through it, no problems, because the car's not going fast enough. But then whenever you hit that sort of average speed of the track, the radiator starts to block up. It just can't flow that amount of air. So then it has to go somewhere else. And if that somewhere else influences the performance of the side pod or the underfloor, then it's a dramatic change on the performance of the car at high speed. Because obviously, we do get corners above 200, 220 kilometres an hour. So you want to try and manage that spillage flow out of the radiator as best possible. And that type of radiator inlet manages that style of flow much better, as it just joins up with the flow going across the top of the side pod and down into the Coke bottle area. So I think they've, as I say, they've opened up lots of doors for themselves. Now it's about optimising that outer edge of the floor, getting all the turning vanes, all the slots and bits and pieces into the right position to let that flow that's going through there now be complementary to the underfloor of the car. So I wouldn't expect to see them just sort of go out now and be doing pole position times. It'll take a little bit of time, I think, for all the small detail to sort of mount up and get put onto the car. But as I say, I think they've opened some doors.
And also looking on the aero side further back, you noticed a little bit of a change in the beam wing approach. Again, some Red Bull hints there.
Yeah, I mean, it's important that we look back through the year, and I think one of the areas that the Red Bull probably changed from race to race quite consistently was how the beam wing interacts. There is a sort of box area where the beam wing can go, and it can be a maximum of two components, two flaps. You could have a one-piece beam wing if you want, which is seen on a few occasions. But it doesn't say they've got to be mounted as a wing. It's not as though you have to have a main plane and a flap as such, like the upper wing is, and their sizes are restricted. The beam wing's pretty open, so you can have your main plane actually as a one big turning vane, as Haas have done now, which operates the underfloor. It works with the underfloor quite dramatically as a sort of trailing edge extension, I suppose you might call it, for the underfloor. And then you have the other flap of it, as a more of a trim flap to tidy up the airflow for the underneath of the upper wing. And that was one of the things I said very early on last year, that whenever Red Bull had their excess speed from DRS, I suppose all the other teams were calling it, was the fact that they were working the whole back of the car as one piece, not as three individual items. They didn't have a diffuser, a beam wing, and a top wing. They had all the back of the car. The flow was all connected up. All those parts were talking to each other. And going way back, because aerodynamics is still the same. There's a massive change in regulations, but actually this is just a piece of kit that's going through airflow, and it's producing forces. And that's been the same since the horse and cart, really. You still got wind in your face whenever you're flying along with your horse, so that aerodynamics don't change. And going back to the 91 Jordan, we used to run with a very small central wing, I suppose you might call it, halfway between the beam wing and the upper wing, even at places like Monza or Hockenheim, high-speed tracks, because it just meant you could run so much less upper wing, but the three of them would sort of talk to each other, so you end up with more rear downforce by putting in that small flap, rather than taking it out, which everybody else used to do, and putting on a more upper wing as such. So, as I say, if you can get the whole back of the car to work together, it's a really important part of it, because the DRS then can affect the whole back of the car as well. So, yeah, as I say, with Haas, I can't say they've got everything right, because we haven't seen it in detail enough, but I think they've put themselves in a better place than they ended last season. So now they just got to use their development correctly, because for quite a few years they haven't really moved forward from where they started the season. This has got to be a new challenge for them. Stabilise, but keep moving forward, because, as I said earlier on in one of my columns, the only thing I guarantee is really somebody's going to win the Constructors' Championship this year, and somebody's going to finish 10th in it. Who that is, it's not defined just yet, but it is going to happen for sure. And as long as if you finish 10th, but you're fighting with the guy who's 9th, you've done okay. But somebody's going to have to finish last in that championship.
It's worth us having a look at some of the mechanical aspects of the car, because, of course, Haas has the Ferrari technical partnership. So that means, Mark, that it's actually got access to latest spec Ferrari stuff. So Ferrari suspension, basically all the non-transferable components. If you want it in really simple terms, the team has to do pretty much all its aero stuff and the monocoque and things like that. But all the mechanical bits, the suspension, the gearbox, the bits under the skin, that can be supplied. But no particular surprises there, in that they've got the same broad suspension geometry insofar as it's push rod front, pull rod at the rear. So I guess that's to be expected. Yeah,
that's just telling us that's what Ferrari is sticking with. It's the opposite of what Red Bull and McLaren have done. They've gone pull rod front, push rod rear. But some aerodynamicists will tell you that won't make any difference. It's just a different way of doing the same thing. There are others who say that there are some advantages they can see in doing it the way Red Bull and McLaren have done it. But Ferrari have chosen to stick with what they had already. But I think Gary noticed some extra anti-dive on the front, and the anti-squat of the rear seems to have been enhanced as well.
Yeah, it's difficult to see from the renders, and obviously they can cheat them a little bit. So I wouldn't get too excited yet about what we've seen suspension-wise. All I'll say is that you've got an aerodynamic platform that is the underfloor, that is a large area close to the ground, and it's generating a lot of downforce. Now, suspension-wise, you have to manage that ride height change. The ride height change can be dramatic to the centre of pressure and the amount of downforce and how it all works. So it's no good having the best underfloor in the world at one particular ride height. You have to have the best underfloor in the world at lots of different ride heights, because that's the one thing the car will do. The ride height will change from coming out of a slow corner at 50 kilometres an hour to hitting the brake pedal at end of a fast straight at 320, 350 kilometres an hour. The ride height will have changed dramatically going down that straight, but it'll also change dramatically with weight transfer. So you've got to try and manage that as best possible. If anybody comes along, for 2024 and they haven't really looked at in detail at trying to control that part of the car, and my book, it's anti-dive in the front and anti-lift in the rear that's really critical. You can cope with a little bit of squat off the corner because that's okay. It just gives you better rear grip and better traction. But it's when you hit the brake pedal, you just don't want the car to change attitude, because if it does change attitude, you're going to have the weight transfer off the rear tyres onto the front tyres, but you're also going to have an aerodynamic shift onto the front tyres. And those two combined really makes the rear of the car very nervous. So what you'll end up with, balance-wise, is to reduce the nervousness of the rear of the car. That'll just give you a bunch of mid-corner understeer, and you'll just have an average car. So you've got to control that platform. So I'll be surprised if Haas doesn't have more, as I say, anti-dive in the front and anti-lift in the rear, because, as you say, the Ferrari gearbox is used by Haas. But the pull rod suspension on the rear of the car also confuses me a little bit, because that area where the pull rod goes down into the gearbox is the area where you want to make the gearbox as narrow as possible to help the diffuser. The diffuser's got a certain width. You can't go wider, but you can go narrower, and you can increase its performance that way. So it seems strange that they would stick with the pull rod suspension, because, as I say, that area of the gearbox where you got the rocker, driving the torsion bar, etc., is where you want to really optimise the aerodynamics of the underfloor. And by going to a push rod, you get rid of that problem. It doesn't really matter that everything's on top of the gearbox, because, as we can see, most teams have radiator exits, all that sort of stuff at the top there somewhere. So the width is not so critical. Again, on the pull rod front suspension, I think the pull rod goes hand in hand with the anti-lift on the top wishbone, because the geometry of it, the way it works, is a bit better. You can also have, the way the regulations are written, you're allowed one rocker to turn the direction of the push rod or pull rod, basically. Force, you're allowed one rocker to turn that around into a torsion bar or into a spring as such. So by having a rocker at the top driving a torsion bar, you're allowed one mechanism to change the rotation. By having a pull rod and a rocker at the bottom driving probably a push rod linked to another rocker driving the push rod, you can actually get away with two. And if you've got two, you can have much more rising rate on the front suspension. So it's playing with the regulations and finding that grey area. So again, it'd be interesting to see in more detail, and hopefully when we get to Bahrain and have a good snoop up and down the pit lane, we might see a little bit more of that sort of small detail stuff. But that small detail stuff is so important to the overall package.
Yeah, and certainly there have been occasions where renders of cars have had suspension geometry changes when the real car appears. The Haas, in fact, is due to run for the first time on January the 11th at Silverstone. And in fact, they're doing their second filming day, I think, on the 19th in Bahrain, so a couple of days before the Bahrain test. So they'll have a reasonable amount of shakedown running prior to the actual pre-season test. Anything else that caught your eye on the car, Gary? Obviously, there were some areas that you couldn't see, like you say, the floor edges. We can't see much detail of. The diffuser's just a black hole, basically, in the images.
No, I think overall, I mean, you look at the engine cover, the headrest intake. They're opened up there a bit more to get more cooling up to that area. Not many years ago that would have been a no-no as such, because you want to keep everything as low as possible. But nowadays, they package so much in on top of the engine cover there for cooling, as well as, because the side pods have become the priority, and the radiator intake for the side pods have become the priority. So you have to find the maximum compromise. When I was saying there about the heating or the cooling, opposite the heating, the cooling for the car, and 200 kilometers an hour or 220, something like that, is an average speed. Obviously, from there, then you have an ambient that you work to. Probably your average ambient, I suppose, would be high 20s, maybe 30 degrees, if you take the average track. So when you're doing the cooling, you need to sort of be honest with yourself, and you need to make sure that the car can cope with Mr. Average cooling as required. And then you can open up or close down a fraction from there. If the temperature goes up to 34, 35, you can open up a little bit. If it goes down to 20s, you can close it down a little bit. When you do close down the cooling, you will get a little bit more downforce. When you open it up, you get a bit less downforce. So you really don't want to be one end of that scale. You want to be right in the middle of it if you can, and be honest with yourself. And that's one of those sort of things, the amount of louvers you see on the engine covers and stuff. We won't know that until we really see them running in some temperatures to who's got it right. Because what I don't understand is some of these teams, and we heard it a lot from Mercedes last year about having to back off to get the car to cool. Because the one thing in the race is that if you're not in pole position and you're not out the front, you're going to be in traffic. There's a very good chance you're going to be in traffic. And if you're in traffic, the only way you can get past is to keep hustling the guy in front of you. And if the car's going to overheat when that's happening, you're just going to have to turn down the performance of it. So one of the most important things with these cars is to be honest with yourself as far as cooling is concerned. And as I say, Haas has moved a bit of their cooling from the inlet of the side pod to the rollover bar area, which is always a benefit. I think that my assumption of the car right now would be that it's a better looking package than they ended last season with, and they've opened some doors which they should get a return from once they go through them in the wind tunnel and optimise the little stuff that has to go with it. And that's really what they've got to focus on doing. And I think they probably got a good plan for that this year, whereas last year they didn't seem to get any return from all their wind tunnel time. So who knows? Management structure, everything is going to be different for them. They're a small team. Gene Haas doesn't want to put any more money into it, which I don't blame him. He wants to see a return for his investment. And once he sees that return for his investment and they take a little step up the ladder, perhaps he will put his hand a little bit deeper in his pocket. But first of all, he wants to see it work to a level that he has a smile on his face again.
Yeah, and that's why this car's important. It's not necessarily where it starts, but it needs to be the right direction, the right concept, and develop through the season. So that's the absolute key for this.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold!
Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Well, let's look at Haas in general now, Mark, because the messaging has been all about managing expectations, hasn't it? I mean, I know expectations weren't particularly high for Haas after last year's last place. Do you see any rays of hope with not just the car they've got, but also what we're starting to hear about the tweaks and changes that Ayo Komatsu has made since taking over from Steiner?
Well, Ayo Komatsu's being, quite open in that he doesn't expect them to be setting the world alight in Bahrain. And the reason he's given is that doing that interim car last year diverted a lot of resource away from this car, but he felt it was very necessary to do it because it'd give them the foundation, to give them the data to get a better understanding of this concept. And that, he feels, will allow them to really make much more effective upgrades on the car than they were able to do last year when whatever they tried didn't add performance. So he's saying, it's that was a big level of commitment from us to do that update in Austin last year, and that was all resource and time that wasn't going into this car. So we're going to be a few weeks behind, So I don't think there's any disgrace in that. We heard from McLaren last year that they don't expect us to be doing anything spectacular early season, but we think we'll be really good later on. And that's exactly how it turned out. I don't think anyone's seriously expecting Haas to make such a spectacular upgrade as McLaren made partway through the year. But yeah, there's every reason to to expect that it will gradually be more competitive through the season.
And Gary, though, it's a little bit more information about the way they've got the team set up now. They've confirmed Andrea Di Sordo is technical director. He was the chief designer. We've talked about that before, but it's now 100% set in stone. They've appointed a performance director, which was a role they didn't have before. That's Damien Brayshaw. They've also talked about making sure the driver feedback is feeding more effectively into the system. They've talked about having the closed loop into the aero, wind tunnel and CFD departments, tying everything together, making sure they don't hit dead ends in terms of development. Is that sort of thing genuinely encouraging? Do you hear that and think, well, that's the right sort of thing you should be doing? Or is it just developmental team noise that just says, yeah, we're doing something but doesn't put any meat on the bone?
No, I think it's very good what they're doing. I do back it 100% because, communication between the departments, especially as you get bigger, it's just more and more difficult every day. So you have to make sure that you're all pulling in the same direction. Is it the right direction or is it the wrong direction? Well, that sorts itself out with time. But you've got to pull in the same direction because if you're all going off in splinter groups, it's just a waste of time. So, the thing about the data that the cars gather, they got huge amount, bucket loads of data, and all the engineers can sit down and analyse it. But I would struggle to find two engineers that would analyse it and come up with the same assumption, to be honest. The one thing about the driver driving the car is he is the driver driving the car. That's what he does. You need to listen to him, and then you need to try and match that data to what he's saying to try and find a reason for it happening, an engineering reason, I suppose. But there's no point in looking at this data and making assumptions from it that, if we do this, it'll fix that peak of data there and blah, blah, blah. You have to focus on the driver. You have to focus on his driving comments, and you have to look for reasons for it within the data. And, you can see that. He'll complain about understeer through a certain corner. You have to look and see what created that understeer. You look at the data and see where that understeer came from. You're able to see it on the data, the steering lock and the increasing steering lock and the lateral forces diminishing because he hasn't got the grip to generate lateral force. So the car's understeering, but you need to look at why that happened because when it is happening, it's too late. You have to find the problem before it's happening, and that's what the data is all about. So communication within the group of people that's there needs to be 100% open. But then there also needs to be to make sure that everybody pulls off in the same direction. When you make a decision that you're looking at it in this direction, and this is the thing you want to try and analyse and fix, then that's the thing you want to try and analyse and fix. Just not go out the door and go off at a completely different tangent. Because it's not just about finding downforce these days, it's car characteristics. These cars are quick. The turn-in speed in these vehicles is mind-blowing. So the more confidence the driver has, the faster he'll turn into the corner. His talent then sorts out the next bit. Nearly all the mistakes that we see or errors that we see in drivers or the car creating an error is in that first third of the corner, getting up to the corner and turning the steering wheel and getting into it. How many times have you seen the car swap ends or the understeer starts and he runs wide? But it's all happened in that even before a third of the corners happened. Because once you get that first third of the corner, the driver uses his talent to exit the corner as fast as possible, and the car becomes less of a problem. It's that first part of the corner that they really got to focus on, and that's about aerodynamic stability, braking stability, car movement, the driver feeling the load building up on their outside rear tyre. So much of that is all just about feel, and that's the driver's the only guy can comment on that.
And also, Mark, talking about the behaviour of the car when there's steering lock on, obviously the problems they had with tyre management last year, they have said they haven't got absolutely 100% being able to solve it and completely understand it, but it's pretty clear it was down to the way some of the downforce was disappearing, not necessarily in entirely predictable ways when there was lock on. So they know where that problem is. So that's a key thing for this car that we can't judge at this stage. Have they understood how to tackle some of the root cause of that? Because it's really easy to say, well, we have problems when there's steering lock on, but quite another to make things work aerodynamically. Those exposed rotating wheels, they're complicated beasts aerodynamically.
Yeah, a big part of these cars particularly is controlling wheel wake, and what the airflow is doing further down the car. And as you steer, it's got some pretty fundamental implications on that. And if they didn't have a full understanding of that, and the car was suddenly seeing a step change reduction in downforce as the lock went on, then that's got implications upon how hard the tyre is being used. And it might even help you over a lap, and we saw that it used to qualify quite well on occasion, but it will hurt you over a sequence of laps as the tyres degrade faster than the other cars. And that did seem to be where they were at with that car. And I don't think they ever finally nailed what it was that the wheel wake was doing, but it definitely seemed connected to. It definitely seemed to have an aero cause rather than a mechanical cause.
Yeah, the big thing really is the balance. It's one of these sort of situations you never hear drivers complaining about understeer, oversteer going down the straight. And the one thing we need to not forget is that the Haas was actually quite a quick car in qualifying. It was quite good. Whether that be because the tyres worked quicker or whatever is irrelevant. It was potentially a reasonably quick car. They could qualify at least one of the cars in the top 10, fairly often. And as you say, Mark, the wheel wake, managing that wheel wake and how that affects the sealing down the underfloor, I would have said that probably the wheel wake was affecting the fact of degrading the sealing down the underfloor. And as the tyre grip went away a little bit, the rear tyres went away faster, and suddenly you had the car sliding a bit more. And as we know, with these tyres, they don't like sliding, they overheat, and that sort of compounds the problem. So it's just a spiral to nowhere. But what you need to do is aerodynamically have the car so you can turn the steering wheel and put steering angle on the car, and it keep a stable centre of pressure. Or even, if you want to move it one way or another, fine, as long as you know about it. But as I say, I've always found it difficult with a car if the centre of pressure, if it shifts rearwards with steering lock, or you lose front downforce with steering lock, it's always a bit confusing for the driver, because the first thing he does if he's got understeer is put more steering lock on, and if you lose more front downforce, then you put more steering lock on, and you lose more front downforce. So it's a spiral to nowhere. You've got to give the driver the tools to use to help his problems, and if it's the wrong way around, it will make his problems bigger. So understanding it's very, very important, and I think that's one of the areas where, as I say, with the way I look at the car at the moment, I think Haas have done a reasonable job to give themselves more opportunity to move stuff around a little bit.
Yeah, that'll be the big test for them, because of course it's not just the wheel lock on, it's the car when it's at angles, if you like, to the direction of travel, etc. So it's horrendously complicated. But just to conclude, Mark, obviously the prognosis for Haas isn't brilliant, but what do you think's achievable this season? Should we just write them off as inevitable last place team, or do you think there's some hope here?
No, I don't think it's inevitable it'll be last. I don't think it would be a disgrace if they were last, as long as there was a competitive last, as Gary was saying earlier on, as long as they have a fight with those teams around them. That's not really in their control. All they can do is work with what they've got. They can't control how the Sauber goes, or how the Williams goes, or whatever the racing, is it Racing Bull is going to be called? They were their rivals from last year. They've got no control over that, but they can continue to tread the path that they're on with their new structure. Just follow that as best they can, and try and have everyone pointing in the same direction and see where that takes them. But I don't think it's inevitable that they'll be last, but I don't think it would be a disgrace if they were.
As you say, Gary, one team will finish first, another team will finish last. Those are two certainties. But how do you see Haas's potential this year?
I see it as better than last year, to be honest. I think that their management changes, although it'll take a little bit of time to see them all filter into it. I think they might be going into a little bit more of a bit more racerish, I suppose you might call it, reacting to the situation in front of them. I think Gunther Steiner, was a good guy, funny guy, lovely to chat to and stuff. You might have to use the beeper now and again, but that's life. But I'm not so sure that he just had that driven racer attitude. I think it'll be a different team this year, to be honest. And I've got a little bit of hope for them. I don't think we're going to see massive changes for this year, but but I think we'll get the groundwork done this year and into the beginning of this year at least. So I would expect them to move forward a little bit. Now, again, as I said earlier, and as Mark said, you can be a competitive last. Still going to have somebody finish last. So just be a competitive last. That's step one. Step two is to be a little bit better than that. But that depends so much on how the others operate. So you can only do what you can do.
Yeah, I think the positive thing is, while I fear for the long term of this team, because I don't think they're investing enough, and that will mean in the long term they'll fall behind in terms of performance potential. I don't feel that teams like Williams and State Sauber and so on are moving yet out of reach, as it were. So if they do a maximising job, if you like, of what they've got, they can be in the mix in that battle and be picking off points finishes on a sort of semi-regular basis. So yeah, very, very interesting to see how this team goes. I don't think it's all doom and gloom, and they'll be hoping that even if it starts a bit slowly, the engineering changes, the technical changes will yield good performance gains, which was the problem last year. They basically had 4 months in the wind tunnel where they found almost no downforce gains, negligible gains. It wasn't worth pressing the button to make things. So they need to change that massively. Well, thanks very much, Gary and Mark, for your insight. Head to therace.com. Don't forget the hyphen. Plenty to read there, including Gary's in-depth analysis of the car with some great images there as well. Listen to our other podcasts, including the Race F1 Tech Show with Gary, of course. Bring Back V10s that tells classic F1 stories, our IndyCar, Formula E and MotoGP podcast too. And check out YouTube for long and short form videos. This is just the first part of the epic that is launch season, so stay with us for everything you need to know from the world of Formula One.
The Athletic.